And when I asked myself what the Punisher would be doing today, I knew that he would be on the southern border, intercepting people traffickers, child traffickers, drug runners, and terrorists that have been pouring across our southern border like an avalanche. Uh, so we announced the book. Out of the blue, a far left hate site called the Daily Costs ran an article which was headlined, Mike Barron writes another racist AF comic book. It was written by a purple-haired woman who has never read anything I've written, and it was obvious from the article in which she described the story fallaciously without ever having read it because it hadn't been released yet. She also discussed my previous book, Thin Blue Line, as a book about white racist police officers who go into black neighborhoods to kill as many black people as possible. Well, the two police officers in Thin Blue Line don't kill anybody. They hadn't read that either. And when my editor, Chris Brawley, offered the book in PDF form to Daily Cost so they could read it for themselves, they said, we will take a look. That was 4 months ago. And as of today, they still haven't read it.
Hello, Culminators. Thank you so much for joining me. This is actually the first time that I have recorded a ColemanNation podcast in a little while. It's been a very hectic period of time for so many reasons. Hectic and to some extent traumatic. And there's also the alcoholism issue. No, not for me, but certainly for some of you. And I could name names, but the break is over, and maybe this is even season 3. I don't know if we can get new graphics together that fast, but it does seem like a good time to settle in for the long season between now and the return of the warmth. I'm speaking to you from one of the true garden spots. You can see it over my shoulder. That's right, Newark, New Jersey. Out the other window is Manhattan, but you can't see it from here. And again, welcome to ColemanNation. And I'm welcoming today to culminate with us together my friend and client, Mike Barron. And it is actually kind of an interesting coincidence because since Mike and I first got to know each other entirely by coincidence, I have gotten a lot more plugged into the world of comics and what's going on with that culture, which is not one that I'm intimately familiar with, but I've sort of gotten pulled into this world of the nerds, the nerd YouTubers who are very interested in what's going on with Marvel, going on with Disney. So maybe Mike and I will talk about some of that. But the reason Mike and I got together, we'll talk about that as well. Let me please introduce and join us Mike Barron. Mike, welcome to ColemanNation. How are you?
Very good, sir.
Looking at your fascinating background there, and it's not a little distracting. I won't kid myself. Distracting as hell, in fact. Florida man. Mike, tell us the story. You are a comic book auteur.
I've been a writer my whole life. I've managed to avoid real work for 40 years now. I've been fired from every regular job I ever had, so it's a good thing I know how to write. I wrote The Punisher for 5 years for Marvel. I've written Flash, Batman, Star Wars, many other popular titles. But recently, I've been crowdfunding my own books. Comics are just like any other branch of the arts these days in that they are split right down the middle between those on the left who have lost all interest in entertainment and those on the right whose primary job is to entertain. I met Ron because I did a book called Private American. And the reason I wrote Private American, it was apparent to any reader that Marvel was embarrassed by the Punisher and was trying to kill him off. And they've done a very good job. They've humiliated the Punisher 1,000 different ways. The sales are in.
Tell us about the Punisher. Tell us what the personality, the elevator pitch. Who's the Punisher?
Well, the Punisher was initially a ripoff of Don Pendleton's The Executioner. He appeared in a copy of Spider-Man many years ago, and he proved so popular that he was given his own series. First, there was a 5-issue series drawn by Mike Zeck, and then I was asked to take over the regular title with issue number 1. I wrote issue number 1 through issue number 65. I approached it as a straight crime comic, and for 3 years there were no flying saucers, time travel, barbarians, or superheroes. Then we got a new editor, and I began to integrate him a little more into the Marvel world.
And this is before anyone even started thinking about multiverses, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there was a great science fiction writer named Philip Jose Farmer who invented multiverses long before they came to Marvel. But when my tenure was through, they hired a new writer, and their changes were in the foot. And all of a sudden, the Punisher, whom I thought should exist in the real world that we know, was interacting with Doc Strange and the Avengers and cosmic characters. And to me, that wasn't the purpose of the book, but that's water under the bridge. Many years later, I was looking at what Marvel was doing to the Punisher, and I perceived a vacuum there, a vacuum for people who wanted the old Punisher, not in a retro way, but they wanted a serious American vigilante in the vein of Death Wish with Charles Bronson. He played an architect named Paul Kersey, whose family was killed by thugs. And then he got religion and he got a gun. Another great American vigilante is Dirty Harry. But there were vigilantes in real life as well. Wild Bill Hickok was a vigilante, and so was Kit Carson. I perceived a great need for this type of character, and I asked myself, what would the Punisher be doing if I were writing him? And it seemed obvious.
And when is this happening culturally? You're saying this? So is this that close to that Charles Bronson era? Is it the late 70s?
No. The Private American takes place today because things have changed so much. That's where the inspiration came from. I simply cite those characters to note that vigilantes have always figured large in the American imagination, and that Americans.
Because there's something about it's an individualistic concept, and it's a non-state concept, right?
That's true. That's true. And it's integral to our history because when the West was settled, when pioneers headed west, there was no law out there. There was no police force. And it wasn't until decades later sometimes that these towns incorporated and they said, we better hire a sheriff. Because first came the vigilantes, and they weren't all good. I mean, we know there were a lot of bad vigilantes who hang people at the drop of what? An apple. But anyhow, there's a movie called The Oxbow Incident, which illustrates it very well. So vigilantes have always loomed large in the American imagination. And when I asked myself what the Punisher would be doing today, I knew that he would be on the southern border, intercepting people traffickers, child traffickers, drug runners, and terrorists that have been pouring across our southern border like an avalanche. So we announced the book. Out of the blue, a far-left hate site called the Daily Costs ran an article which was headlined, "Mike Barron writes another racist AF comic book." It was written by a purple-haired woman who has never read anything I've written, and it was obvious from the article in which she described the story fallaciously without ever having read it because it hadn't been released yet. She also discussed my previous book, Thin Blue Line, as a book about white racist police officers who go into black neighborhoods to kill as many black people as possible. Well, the two police officers in Thin Blue Line don't kill anybody. They hadn't read that either. And when my editor, Chris Brawley, offered the book in PDF form to Daily Cost so they could read it for themselves, they said, "We will take a look." That was 4 months ago. And as of today, they still haven't read it. this woman called for us to be deplatformed from Kickstarter, where she herself was running her own campaign for her own comic book, and she succeeded. These people raised such a hue and cry, and you know what I mean about these people, the
Yes.
mob, the leftist mob, and they all started writing Kickstarter, and they kicked us off. And then Crowdfunder kicked us off. Chris actually spoke to the head of Crowdfunder, and he said, well, we're not going to have anybody associated with Comicsgate on our platform. Comicsgate is the name applied by the left to those of us who have broken away from the regular comic industry to crowdfund our own books. Comicsgate is all about entertainment. Job one, entertainment. Everything I write is designed to entertain. The fact that it has to do with current events should not come as a shock. So much of our entertainment draws inspiration from what's going on in the daily world. And that's all I was doing. I wrote Thin Blue Line during the summer of 2020 because I watched city after city going up in flames. And each time there's some fool out front saying, these are mostly peaceful protests. And then politicians, people who had taken an oath to uphold the Constitution, started to call for defunding the police. And I thought, this is madness. So I wrote a cautionary tale about two police officers trying to survive the night in a riot-torn city. There are no lectures, there are no bumper stickers. It's all drama. That did very well. We attracted a lot of attention because we were attacked by the left relentlessly, and this always happens. And that's how I came to know you, Ron, is we were attacked by the Daily Kos, and we came to Ron to see if there was anything could be done. Everything they said was a lie, or as Dorothy Parker once said, everything he says is a lie, including the words and the. I have completed a second Thin Blue Line script, and my artist, who was a full-time police officer, is about halfway through. And more importantly, I'm finishing up the second issue of Private American, which deals with the ramifications of the open border again. And this time we get specific in anticipating a major terrorist event on American land, which is going to happen, and who might do it. And in my book, there are a number of parties vying to destroy America, including Chinese troops and Islamic militants. And we know they're pouring over the border. We've seen them. They keep records about these people as best they can, and then they fly them wherever they want to go in the dead of night.
Yeah, well, you sound like you're talking the talk of someone who is not going to be particularly popular with a certain kind of ideological stripe, that's for sure. I mean, you say that the comics world is split down the middle. Is it really down the middle?
Well, the conventional comics are hanging on by their nails. Anybody who's paying attention knows that Marvel and DC are circling the drain. Their books don't sell. And one of the reasons the books don't sell is they don't even bother to entertain. It's not about entertainment. It's about indoctrination and speeches and shaming. And don't take my word for it. Go into a comic shop and pick up any book and see what's going on. I could show you pictures of Superboy kissing his boyfriend.
Right.
They've turned every character gay.
And what do you think? I've asked this question to so many people, including Vivek Ramaswamy. Why is it that you think that these companies, which are businesses, don't realize? It's one thing for the studios where they just until they hit the wall in the last year or so, they were so awash in money, and it seemed that it would never end. So they figured, okay, fine, we'll fix the world up the way we want it to be, because money's no object, and so audiences will take it and ask for more. But comics hasn't really been a particularly profitable enterprise historically. I mean, what made them think that the people who are consumers of comic books would go for that kind of thing?
Oh, they don't think that at all. Comics, like any branch of the entertainment industry, is filled with liberals, but comics are unique in this way. They're the simplest multimedia platform you can do. Anybody can do a comic, and everybody does. They also attract a lot of disturbed personalities. They always have. If you go to a major comic convention, you'll see what I mean. That's all I'm going to say about that. But a lot of these disturbed
Well, I did go,
personalities.
listen, I did go to one when I was a teenager, and I did see Stan Lee there, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Stan was a
Disturbed
stand-up
personnel.
guy. Yeah, and he had a mission, and he stated his mission frequently, which was to celebrate the good, denigrate the bad, and lead a good life. Um,
Excelsior.
yeah, Excelsior, face front, true believers. These days, people are attracted to comics, at least corporate comics, and those that are established publishers, to make a point. They have an agenda, and the agenda is obvious to anybody who flips through the book. And it's agenda we're very well familiar with, and it follows the narrative. I don't have to tell you what the narrative is. You all know what the narrative is, but in shorthand, it's this: man bad, woman good, white bad, all other races good, Western civilization bad, all other civilizations good. And that, in
Now,
a nutshell,
listen, let me stop you. Let me play devil's advocate here. Well, wasn't that always true, though? I mean, after all, Superman was his job, right, was to stand for truth, justice, and the American way.
it's absolutely right.
And that was a narrative about an American way, which didn't really embrace everyone and everything, and
That's
was
true.
colonialist and was. So, what's the response to that?
Well, I have to point out that Superman was created in 1939, in a year that the world teetered on the edge of war. And it was created by two Jewish kids, Siegel and Schuster, who were watching what was happening in Nazi Germany. And they appropriated the term Superman from the Germans, where it's Übermensch. And they said, okay, this is your hero. We're going to take it and turn it around and use it against you. So Superman, and even more so Captain America, fought Nazis.
Right.
That's why they came into being. Today, because academia and every organization, every branch of government has been infiltrated by the left, there's no more consensus, and they can get away with stuff. I always say this, that most people have their hands full doing their job, taking care of their families, and kicking back on weekends. But there's a certain class of person that spends every waking second scheming how to get power over others. And these are the people who have taken over our government, and to a large extent, our entertainment industries. They're not interested in what the Constitution promised. They're not interested in entertainment. They're interested in their narrative and their agenda.
And I mean, I think to some extent, part of what I'm hearing from you in answer to my question is, Ron, it is true that there was a point of view that drove comics, in the 30s and 40s and even, and 50s and 60s. And it wasn't, yes, and it was an American centric point of view. And it wasn't something that Americans felt they had to apologize for.
No.
Yes, of course. I mean, it was always meant to be entertainment, and entertainment, any narrative necessarily has a point of view. I mean, it may have multiple points of view, but it can't have zero.
It's true.
And as you say, there's no consensus, and the consensus has been affirmatively undermined.
That's right.
So that we're living in a world now where we say that we can justify, as the Nazis did, we can justify the worst barbarism you can visit on other people by narrative. We can justify the most horrible crimes on the streets of America or bordering the Gaza Strip by narrative, by entitlement, by by people who don't, but the difference is because you're a writer, so you know all about narrative. Sorry about that. You're a writer, you know all about narrative. This is something very different. There's nothing artistic about it. It's really a Marxist capturing of an entire of all the arts.
Yeah. And what I have to say is this has to do with a major shift in 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 American point of view. The men who created the Constitution were smart men. They were serious adults. They weren't in it for themselves. The Constitution is probably the most perfect political document ever created. And it put the primacy of the individual first and foremost. This is the only country in the world which claim that individuals have God-given rights that don't come from government, and we have to pay attention to the individual. And this has been supplanted by group politics. When you have group politics, you throw common sense out the window. As Thomas Sowell said, have we reached the ultimate stage of absurdity where people are being punished for something their ancestor did years ago, but people today are not being held accountable for things that they're actually doing? And that's where we're at.
That's a great point. And there's something that really doesn't add up here, right? Because the idea of a superhero is, here's a person, essentially human, not a divine creature, it's certainly not an animal, a human endowed with special powers, who makes a difference, by recognizing a couple of things: good and bad. There's good and there's bad, and as a superhero, I'm going to take the side of the good, and I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to make a personal sacrifice as an individual. I mean, look, most superheroes are vulnerable. It's even Superman. We have to work in the kryptonite eventually to make him something. I mean, I remember my dad telling me that Captain Marvel was the world's mightiest mortal. Superman was basically invulnerable. The point is, though, they still had to trouble themselves. They had a mission as individuals to make a difference. And as you pointed out, every single one of them was this is the first thing that ever even occurred to me. These are vigilantes. Who asked Superman to come? Who asked Batman, who doesn't really have superpowers? He's just a super guy. Who asked him to go and get involved? Can't Commissioner Gordon take care of all this stuff? And on the other hand, the modern sensibility is that we're gonna do all these race swaps and gender swaps with these individual characters
in the name of equity.
Well, not only in the name of equity, but also violating that framing of the individual. In other words, I'm going to have a black superhero stand in for all black people, and he's going to validate or vindicate something about the black experience on behalf of all black people, which is antithetical. No one ever thought of Superman, and pardon me for being such a Neanderthal, just referring to the most well-known, comics, but no one thought of these guys as representing anything other than themselves. And the fun was, how are these super guys going to use their special talents, their special gifts, to make the world a better place? Which is really something that, I mean, don't you think that people seeing that back in the day said were in some way inspired?
Well, that was one of the purposes of those characters when they were created, was to inspire Americans and to bring out the best in them. Superman and Batman would regularly deliver very short speeches about justice and what was right and what was wrong and against hate. But the first purpose of the book back then, even then, was to entertain. And that's what we've lost, because so much entertainment today has no interest in entertaining. It's somebody has a point they want to get across. They have an agenda. There's nothing wrong with an agenda. You can deliver an agenda and still entertain. Look at The Grapes of Wrath or To Kill a Mockingbird. Those are two lasting works of literature that are both fun to read and deliver an important message. But that's art. And when we see the heavy-handed messaging that's being done in comics, it's not art. It's not even craft. It's just ham-handed lectures by angry people. And I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that the whole point of this incursion of people who hate us into this country and group identity is inspired not by a will to do better and uplift all people. It's overwhelmingly inspired by envy and resentment.
Which is not part of the class. In fact, those are qualities that were typically assigned to bad guys in the comics, not main characters.
I know.
You know, I mean, look, I guess, look, there is a certain maturity. I mean, we do have a more mature worldview, wouldn't you agree, than the world of Doris Day and
there's no question about it. A lot of people, I say, they're more sophisticated today. They're more worldly, but it may be they just have less innocence.
Well, and that's true also. Although to some extent, also there's, I mean, and every artist, every performer makes choices about what aspect of reality will be portrayed and what aspect of reality will be either essentialized or completely abandoned. We don't in a regular slice of life movie, we don't show people going to the bathroom or taking a shower unless it's for the purposes of the plot. That we don't want that level of realism. In comics, there's supposed to be lots of action. I mean, traditionally.
It depends on the title, but in superhero books, certainly.
In superhero books. But as we matured, that's exactly where I'm going, right? As we matured and as comics moved from something for young teenagers and kids into really a fully developed art form, we see that even you, as you pointed out, have an agenda. And when you describe the story of Private American, you're picking up the cudgel. You're picking up a point of view that you believe is not being adequately appreciated by others.
That's true. And I have to point out that my Private American, Marcos Zamora, a second-generation Cuban, is not attacking migrants who are simply seeking a better life. He understands what that's like, and he doesn't blame them. He would come too if he were in a position similar to them. He's looking for the people who prey on them and the people that are bringing truckloads of fentanyl into this country, causing 100,000 American deaths a year, and the terrorists that are flooding across the border. That's what concerns him. And it's the stuff of drama. That's why popular entertainment has been dominated for so many years by police shows and lawyer dramas and Westerns, because those programs deal with life and death, medical programs too. And that's the stuff of drama. And that's what people want.
Right. You have the conflict is there for you. There's the tension. There's the, who's going to win, good or evil. You have character development. I mean, these are fascinating works. Now the world, though, is basically split, whether it's really down the middle, whether it's 30-70 or 60-40 or 20-80. You've been basically kicked off what had previously been thought of as non-ideological resources like Kickstarter. Is there an alternate
Yes.
route? So let's talk about that. What is that?
Out of necessity, a friend of mine created a new group called Fund My Comic, fundmycomic.com. And we're on there. And just so people know, I'm not a political character. I don't deliberately try to goad people. My first goal always is to entertain. And that my new book, Florida Man versus Hogzilla, is nothing but entertainment. It's designed to make you laugh out loud, and I guarantee you will laugh out loud. If anyone is interested in obtaining any of my books, including Private American and Thin Blue Line, go to baroncomics.com, baroncomics.com, and it's all there.
So how's it going? I mean, is it, would you say that the effort to build this stuff up, as through alternative distribution and funding channels, does it give you hope? Can you
Oh,
tell?
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
tell me how it's going.
Well, it's going very well. As you can see, we're back on Kickstarter. I think either they were embarrassed by what happened when they learned the truth, or they forgot. But of course, they look over the campaign for Hogzilla, and they see there's nothing controversial about it. It's just designed to make you laugh. And the reason I wrote the Florida Man comic, it's based on my Florida Man novels, is every time I went on the air, there was a new Florida Man story. I don't have to
Right.
recite the headlines for you,
Right.
although there's one that's typical of all of them. Florida Man claims syringe found in rectum is not his. And there are thousands of those stories. And I said, well, geez, this is the stuff of a novel. So I dove in, and I'm working on my fourth Florida Man novel right now. They are by far my most popular novels. I read a lot of novels, but people are hungry to forget. They just want sheer entertainment. And Florida Man delivers. I guarantee you'll laugh out loud. I've had so many reviews say I was listening to it on my car on audio, and I was laughing so hard I couldn't see. I had to pull over to the side of the road. And another guy says, my wife kicked me out of the bedroom because I was laughing so hard she couldn't get to sleep. And that's Florida Man. That's what my goal is with Florida Man. My wife Ann is saying goodbye.
Bye, Ann. So I guess to some extent, if you've got it, I mean, if there are alternative channels, there are alternative fundraising methods, that's a win. I mean, they've actually, to some extent, they've given you more freedom than you would have had if you had to stay within the lines.
That's true. And those of us in Comicsgate all support each other.
Do you ever communicate with, other comics people who say to you, Mike, I don't agree with your politics, but I really don't like what they did to you. It's really out of line. I think it's terrible.
Well, there have been a handful of those, but I've been surprised over the years of friends I had lifelong friends with whom I went on vacation. We go on motorcycle rides together. We stayed at each other's house. Just cut me out of their lives without explanation when they learned I was conservative. And I think that the left is much more likely to do that than the right. I try to hang on to my liberal friends. Thank God I've been able to for a number of them. But those are high-minded people.
You're right. I mean, I don't think there's been anything like this before. And I mean, went to college. When I went to college, politics on campus was a thing. And most of my friends were liberals because that's what most people in college are.
Yeah.
And now it is, look, I mean, things have gotten, since the time you and I talked about having you on the show and the time we're recording this, which is November 4th. Is it? Yes, it's the 5th, November 7th. Okay. I don't know why. What would make me say November 4th? Maybe the fact that my watch says November 4th. And that's why I'm unfit for the work that I do, by the way, because a lawyer who doesn't know what the date is a lawyer who is looking for trouble. But there is, the world has just, I mean, we've seen an eruption of hatred. And it's not only a matter of Jews and Palestinians or Hamas and Israelis. We see what is going on the campuses and what's going on in major institutions, and the moral inversion. If you made a comic like this, it would be so dystopian. Nobody would be able to. Well, and listen, I can't say nobody would be able to buy it. I mean, there's stuff in comics that is pretty far out. no one's meant to buy it. It's not, it's meant to be fantasy, but there's nothing fantastic about what we're experiencing today.
I'm shocked, as you are, by what's going on in the world, and especially the waves of Jew hatred that are washing up on our own shores at every university. Some of them are getting wake-up calls because alumni are notifying them that's the last dime you'll ever get from me. And law services are notifying them every student who participated in these pro-Hamas rallies, they're not going to get a job with us. But this is what the modern university has become. It's become a sewer opening for churning out leftist thought. It no longer tries to teach people how to think. It no longer tries to teach people physics and history and philosophy. The people they hire to teach have they all have agendas. They all have chips on their shoulders. And then they hire these DEI executives for six figures. That's just money washed down a toilet. They do no good.
Money needs nothing to them. These institutions are so awash in money. Again, it's the same thing as with Hollywood. They are immune even to alumni financial pressure. Although, I saw a news story last week. This guy, I forgot his name now, one of these super duper rich guys, who gave 300 million, a multi-gazillionaire, $300 million to Harvard. And he said, boy, I really don't like what I'm seeing coming out of Harvard. Well, guess what? You're a multi-billionaire, and you thought the best thing you could do with $300 million was give it to the richest nonprofit in the world?
I know. They're grateful. They remember college fondly. I have friends like that with whom I graduated at the University of Wisconsin who are big donors.
Oh, Wisconsin is an absolute communist cell. But that's been
Always
true for a
has
long
been. Always has
right.
been.
It always has been. Whereas Princeton, where I went, was a relatively conservative campus until just a few minutes ago. But now it has gotten absolutely awful in all these places. Did you learn to write in college? Was that when you first started?
I first studied writing in college. I wish I had taken it more seriously. I might be a lot further on than I am today, although I also think I'm exactly where I should be. I had a great teacher. His name was Jerry McNeely, and he was the head writer for Marcus Welby, MD.
Oh.
And Professor McNeely said, you make them laugh a little bit, you make them cry a little bit, you scare the hell out of them, and that's entertainment.
That is a pretty pithy summation of it. So, did you major in English?
No, I majored in political science, and a fat lot of good it's done me.
Well, maybe it made you a better, more analytical thinker, and able to understand world events than if you had read a bunch of Keats and whatever it is those literature guys study.
I think so. But we were all friends back in the day. I had a lot of hard left friends. In fact, one of the reasons I'm writing is there was a newspaper in town, a weekly newspaper called Takeover. And it's just exactly what you think it is from the title. It's sticking it to the man. And I went over there one day, and the editor was home, and he had hundreds of new records leaning against the wall. And I said, Mark, where'd you get all these records? And he said, the music companies send them to me. You want some? Take them. Just write something about them. Well, I wanted the records, so I took them, and I wrote something about them, and I've been writing about music ever since.
Oh.
In fact, I was music editor for the Boston Phoenix. It was my job to go out night after night, go to the clubs, listen to the bands, talk to the musicians, and I loved it. I'm a huge jazz nut, but I always wanted to be a writer. That was my number one goal. And I lucked out. When I was in Madison, I returned to Madison after I lived in Boston for 7 years, and I was working at an insurance company when I got a phone call from an editor and said, there's a guy down here trying to sell us his art. I think you should give him a call, because he knew I was interested in comics. And that was my friend Steve Rude. And we created Nexus together in 1981. And Nexus is still being published today. It's one of the most popular comics of all time, certainly one of the most popular and longest lasting independent comics. It's a science fiction superhero book that takes place 500 years in the future.
There you go.
And this issue won us all the major industry awards, particularly the Eisners, which are named after Will Eisner, who created the Spirit.
Sure.
Uh, and he also turned out a lot of comics during World War II for the military.
What I didn't realize when I was growing up, because I was not such a big comics kid, and it should be fairly obvious from this conversation, but as should also be fairly obvious to anyone familiar with what we'll call my work, that I was always that I grew up reading Mad Magazine.
Me too.
And that, to a large extent, did shape my way of seeing the world. I want to say, for better or for worse. I don't think it did me a lot of harm.
No.
I think it did me a lot of good. And Will Eisner really was a tremendous pioneer in the early days of Mad. But I also didn't realize was that a lot of the comic artists that I hear comic people talking about, I was seeing their work in Mad, because that was another outlet to sell your work to.
You bet. I was lucky enough to know Will
Eisner.
He was still active when I entered the world of comics. Got to meet a whole bunch of greats: Jack Kirby,
Yep,
and Stan the Man.
So much of that stuff is still in my head, and there's it's kind of ironic too, because what is it about comics? It's an extremely visual medium. You're a writer, you're not an art. But I always wondered. I mean, I'm sure I know there are a million books and videos that talk about this, but you deliver a script, and then the artist illustrates it. Obviously, can't be the other way around, because they got to know what the characters are going to do. But the choices that they make to compel it, to convey the action, it sticks with you sometimes for the rest of your life. And these are really iconic, a very overused term in our moment, but really iconic images that stick with you forever. Social media is so predominantly visual. Why is it so impoverishing intellectually?
That's a good question. I think we can both agree that social media has been a curse, in that it removes people from the consequences of their own actions. It removes them from reality. And you have people who are now social influencers. They do semi-porn on TikTok and have 100,000 followers, and that's what they do for a living. It also enables these trolls to attack people anonymously and spread scurrilous rumors. It's happened to me. It's happened to a number of my friends.
Sure.
And that's just the other side of the internet. When I started writing comics, I drew each page out by hand. I'm not a good artist, but I'm good enough that anybody can see what I was drawing. And I wrote comics that way for 20 years. So I have a very visual sense.
Oh, in other words, you don't give him a typed up script. You basically you have a sense of what's going to be on what page, and even panel layout.
It was an invaluable exercise because it taught me to always think what happens next. And that's the essential question in all fiction. If the reader doesn't care what happens next, he's not going to turn the page. So I moved along like an inchworm from panel to panel, thinking, what happens here? What happens here? I always had that classic dramatic structure in the back of my head, which is tension and release, which is the source of so much of the fiction that we like.
That's interesting what you're saying, because when I analogize from that to social media, to Twitter, which, as you know, I like to play on Twitter, the analogy that comes to my mind is how much I dislike these super long tweets. I love a thread. To me, getting the reader from tweet to tweet to tweet in a nice long thread, which I haven't done in a while, is part of the craft. and it is kind of like panels in a comic. Now, there's a point at which you're asking too much of the reader, right? I mean, I don't, if it's a 75 stitch, you might say, thread, you've lost me well before 75. I can
That's
guarantee you
true. And we've all seen those they go forever, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks.
that.
And it's usually they're fighting. It's like ferrets fighting. Says you, no, says you.
Well, that's a little, so that's different from what I mean. I'm talking about threads where you yourself do a series of consecutive tweets
Right,
laying
right,
out,
right.
so, and because to some extent I've given up writing. I used to write, essays, and I used to have my own blog. I mean, I still have it, but I don't really blog anymore because people don't have the patience to read it. And you know what? I think I don't have the patience to write it. But when I want to say something that might take more than, 320 characters, I'll do these consecutive tweets. And I think there are more interesting for the reader, just as they're kind of like comic books. Mike, I'm so glad we had a chance to talk about this stuff, and also that I got a little bit better sense um, of what you're doing and where you're going with it, and the certain amount of success that you've had in forging an alternative way of getting your work out there and getting it funded. Uh, BaronComics.com, is that where I should tell everybody to go
That's it.
check you out? It's all good, and like you said, yes, you are in the good graces of Kickstarter once again, but they could take it away from you anytime. So you're not dependent on them anymore. And by being censors, to some extent, they really are undermining themselves.
It's
But
true.
you know, it's just built into the system these days that's how people operate. Um, Anything else, Mike, that you think is worth mentioning to the culminators?
Well, I always urge people to take a hat wherever they go. There are two reasons to take a hat. One is to keep the sun out of your eyes, and the other is to keep the yellow jackets out of your drink.
And on that note, Mike, have a great day.
Thank you, sir.